Hi, welcome to Days of Revolt. This is my conversation with Ralph Nader, the author of Unstoppable, the Emerging Left-Right Alliance to Dismantle the Corporate State. He was a former presidential candidate and a longtime consumer rights lawyer, activist. Thank you, Ralph.
Thank you.
Lewis Powell, who was the general counsel to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and would later be appointed to the Supreme Court, wrote a memo in August 1971 that expressed corporate concern over Nader's work. Quote, "There should be no hesitation to attack the Naders, the Marcuses, and others who openly seek destruction of the system. There should not be the slightest hesitation to press vigorously in all political arenas for support of the enterprise system, nor should there be reluctance to penalize publicly those who oppose it." 1971.
He says it was an attack on the economic system in America. Basically, his memorandum laid out a strategy to attack democracy in America. Right. He said to the business community, you got to hire a lot more lobbyists swarming over Congress. You got to pour a lot more money into both parties, their campaigns. You got to get right-wing speakers to combat progressive speakers, pump money into Heritage and all the other corporate think tanks, to use a euphemism. They're just propaganda venues. He said, come into Washington like a swarm, media, lobbying, put your high executives into government offices, regulator offices, Department of Defense, and so on. And so the Powell memorandum recognized that if you can corrupt the Democratic Party, the Republican Party will be even more corrupt because they'll try to outbid them for the favor of corporatism. After Nixon was elected again in 1972, in spite of Watergate, he stiffened his spine. Up until then, he was scared of liberals. He still heard the rumble from the people coming out of the 60s.
Right.
And so he signed into law in his first term the EPA bill, the OSHA job safety bill, the Product Safety Commission bill. He wanted a better health insurance system than Clinton proposed later. He wanted the voting rights for the District of Columbia. And he also adopted a minimum incomes plan to try to abolish poverty, which Congress split on and rejected. This is Tricky Dick. There's been no president that had that agenda since. Jimmy Carter won the election in 1976. We got the Freedom of Information Act through in 1974, the Clean Drinking Water Act through. We got a Toxic Chemical Prevention Bill in 1976. We got the National Cooperative Bank to fund consumer co-ops in 1978. And then it all began falling into inaction, stagnation. Carter was spooked by the OPEC price increase for gasoline. People like Joan Claybrook really fought successfully to stop the massive drive to deregulation. What we couldn't stop is the non-enforcement of good laws on the books.
Right, and which is essentially how they've invalidated so many of the laws.
Yeah, they put the regulatory agencies, the Auto Safety Agency, the Product Safety Commission, Food and Drug Administration, Environmental Protection Agency, they put them to sleep. And that's why we have a lot of these...
By underfunding them.
Underfunding them and putting pro-corporate people in charge. One of the ways we succeeded in Wisconsin and Illinois and San Diego is to get laws requiring companies in their billing envelopes to put an insert, like your electric, gas, water company, banks, put in their billing envelopes an invitation for their customers to band together and join a nonprofit advocacy group with economists, lawyers, organizers, so on. Governor Mario Cuomo was going to do it for the banks by executive order. So when you got your monthly statement, you get an insert saying, you upset about these $30 bank bounce check charges? You want to do something about whatever, you can join this group. Guess what? Just when we were ready to sweep the country, corporate forces brought a case to invalidate this insert, saying it violated Pacific Gas and Electric First Amendment rights. Supreme Court of California dismissed the case. So the PG&E go to the Supreme Court and they win 5-3. More extreme than Citizens United. The most extreme corporate personhood decision to date, where it basically said that a corporation has a First Amendment right to remain silent and not require to put an insert in the billing envelope at no expense to itself to invite people to join their own consumer defense organization. And guess who wrote the majority opinion? A former utility lawyer from Richmond, Virginia, by the name of Lewis Powell. And guess who dissented on our side? The arch right-winger, Justice Rehnquist, saying a corporation doesn't have a conscience. the insert movement, which would have developed thousands of groups organized to challenge all these companies that were underregulated. The Powell Memorandum led to the massive corruption of the Democratic Party. They broke the barrier between commercialism and citizenship. They commercialized elections. They commercialized politics. So everything was for sale. Well, labor was put on a defensive from which it's never recovered. First, it was being eroded by automation, then by globalization, shipping jobs overseas. And right now, it's like 32 corporate dollars to one union dollar going into the coffers. It's amazing. You could see it. That was the beginning of the slide. This was the basic legal structure for the consumer, environment, and worker safety movements. And it started in 1966 with the auto and highway safety laws, and it went up to the early 70s, and with few exceptions, there hasn't been a single major piece of legislation advancing the health, safety, and economic rights of the American people, arguably since 1976. That's the effect of money in politics. And then something happened with the liberal and progressive groups. They lowered their horizons. They never put forth an aggressive agenda the way Heritage Foundation, Cato Institute, and others have done. Just try to stop a few things. And once you're on a defensive in politics, it's almost impossible to recover. And then citizen groups started making excuses for the few progressive senators and representatives who got away with plateauing with a few good bills they introduced, but they didn't want to be pushed. For example, Senator Sanders does not like to be pushed by the progressives.
Well, you saw this with Obamacare, written for and by the insurance and pharmaceutical industry, destroyed the public option.
The process is very simple. Think of a tug of war. 24/7, the corporations are pulling both parties in their direction. And if one of the parties defies them, they're going to try to defeat the party. And what do the progressive or liberal citizen groups do? They lower their expectation level and settle for less. And in the meantime, the Democrats are saying, hey, we got these guys. They're going nowhere. Once you signal that you're going to vote for the least worst, say the Democrat, you lose your bargaining power. And the Democrat leadership doesn't even look back because they know you've got nowhere to go. You have admitted you've got nowhere to go. Now, who isn't giving it away? The corporate lobbyists. When the dam broke and the corporations went into areas that were relatively forbidden to them, everything was for sale. And you know, when everything's for sale in a democracy, who can buy it? The people with the most money. There's got to be sanctuaries in a democratic society where nothing is for sale. Government shouldn't be for sale. Childhood should not be commercialized and be for sale. The environment shouldn't be for sale. Our genetic inheritance shouldn't be for sale. Elections shouldn't be for sale. They're all for sale. That's why we can develop a left-right alliance, because evangelicals don't like everything for sale. They like a certain spiritual sanctuary. And that's the only political realignment I see in the next 10 years. It's not the parties. It's a left-right alliance on things like prison reform, on the violation of civil liberties in the Patriot Act, on the swollen militarism and the military budget, on crony capitalism. That's all the corporate welfare, subsidies, handouts, bailouts. We got an 80% support on no longer bailing out Wall Street.
In 1996, you essentially used the platform of a third-party candidacy to raise these issues throughout the country. Again, you ran in 2000. If anybody was going to be able to build a third party, it was going to be you. And I think 2000 showed that there was tremendous momentum for that. In the Democratic establishment, blaming you for swinging the election to Bush. They worked hard in every single way, not only to demonize you, but challenge your voting lists, ratchet up your legal fees. Is it possible now, in this political configuration, given the unassailability of corporate power, for a third party to actually even mount a serious challenge?
The voters in this country have been placed in a two-party tyranny. The only way a third party is going to get underway in this country is with a multi-billionaire. You know, Ross Perot got 19 million votes, but even he didn't get one electoral vote. In American history, third parties were first out of the box of justice to oppose slavery in 1840, the Liberty Party, women's right to vote, labor, farmer. All this started with the proliferation of small parties, and then one of the two major parties finally picked it up.
Essentially, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a member of the oligarchic elite who felt and responded to pressure.
By Norman Thomas, the Socialist Party.
There's a 1930 letter that Roosevelt writes to a friend where he said, if we don't institute these kinds of reforms, we're going to get revolution. Capitalism is broken down. And he said to his fellow oligarchs, give up some of your money or you might lose all of your money. And that's how we got 15 million government-created jobs. That's how we got Social Security. That's how we got the public works projects, which created our post offices, national parks.
So one would think with that legacy of success, the last half of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century would really be the best time for third parties. 2 days after the refusal to allow the Florida Supreme Court to recount the ballots imposed by 5-4 majority of the Supreme Court, Senator Joe Biden was heard to say, Ralph Nader's responsible for Bush winning, and he better not come up to Capitol Hill anymore. I used to be asked to testify constantly. I've only testified 5 times in the last 15 years.
Wow.
And the Democrats in the Senate Judiciary Committee kept me from testifying. They were willing to take these horrible Supreme Court nominees because they were so hung up on the year 2000.
That's one of the things many people don't realize is ever since 2000, the people who've hated you the most are not the Republicans, but the Democrats.
And their lackeys in the media. We had huge rallies in front of Wall Street, in front of the New York Stock Exchange in 2008 when the economy was collapsing because of Wall Street's crimes and greed. This is a major industry in New York City, collapsing the whole economy. And the Times somehow couldn't put it on page 1 or in the A section. It was on the obituary page. And that was true all over the country. You really got the sense of who runs a lot of these newspapers. Maybe most of the publishers are Republican, but most of the editors and reporters are Democrats. And they showed a bias that was stunning. The idea of calling our elections Democratic elections is total farce. If a third party starts getting traction, it comes up against a bunch of hurdles where it can never grow, even if it gets 4% in the first round. There's no Western country that puts more obstacles in the pathway of third party independent candidates to get on the ballot or even voters to vote. I'll just give you one story out of Ohio. A woman got us 5,000 signatures in 2004 during the Kerry-Bush contest. They were all invalidated by the state government on the grounds that at age 52, her signature at the bottom of the petitions didn't match her signature when she was 21 years old. And she registered to vote. They leave you off the debates. They lie about counting votes. They miscount votes. Voting machines are going to plague the next election in 2016. The League of Women Voters used to run the debates and were considered too uppity and too independent. The Debate Commission is a private corporation created by the two parties in 1987. They control everything. Which reporters are going to be chosen, how many debates, who can get on, who can't. So it's totally corrupt.
Why is the environmental movement, it appears from the outside, pushed you out?
Well, they've bought into only one of 2 major party candidates can win. You take the least worst. They're not supporting an independent. They're not even abstaining.
Obama drills like Sarah Palin. He opened up the Arctic until Shell didn't want it. He's opened up Florida coastline, the public lands.
And the only reason he didn't support the XL pipeline, this is a good lesson, is because of the demonstrations and the protests and 1,500 people being arrested in one day around the White House. Let me tell you, he would have endorsed it right away. But he saw a peril in the 2012 election.
I remember you explaining to me the importance of mounting a third party was that you got 5, 10, 15 million committed people who openly revolted, defected from the establishment to support a progressive agenda, and that was the only way we were going to put pressure on the establishment by making them afraid. And in particular, the Democratic establishment.
Once they control the 2 parties, who in turn have passed laws that control the access by competitors, small parties, independent candidates, it's over. 65% of people want a viable third party. So it's not like they're enthralled by the 2 parties, but it internalizes itself in the voters' minds. They want to be with the winner. They don't want to, quote, waste their vote.
So let's talk about Bernie Sanders. I asked Senator Sanders why he would not run as an independent, which would allow him to attack the Democratic establishment, and he said, I don't want to end up like Ralph Nader. My own critique is that he has long been a member of the Democratic establishment. He campaigned for Bill Clinton in 1992, again in 1996 after exploding the prison population, NAFTA, tax on welfare. He campaigned for the Democrats in 2004, indeed announced that you should not be running as a third-party candidate. In his voting record, despite his rhetoric, Bernie has supported almost all military appropriations bills, funding for the NSA, funding for the CIA. There is not a pro-Israel resolution by the Israel lobby and AIPAC he hasn't supported. Given the fact that we are being disemboweled by the war industry, we can't talk about creating an egalitarian, a socialist society if we don't confront the war machine, and he won't confront it. He's part of the Democrat. He sits in the caucus.
Yeah.
He has seniority. The Democrats, in a quid pro quo, do not mount serious candidates against him in Vermont, and in return, he doesn't support third-party candidacies, including your own. I would like to know how you view his candidacy and what it means for those of us who confront corporate power.
Well, Bernie Sanders can see beyond the next hill, and I think I know what his game plan is. Basically, he wants to arouse public opinion in a progressive manner domestically so that it pulls the Democratic Party a little bit. But he doesn't want to do this in any way that can take a vote away from the nominee. He's lost his bargaining power electorally 5 months ago when he said he'll endorse the Democratic nominee without saying it depends who it is. His job now, as he sees it, is to mobilize and elevate enthusiasm of progressive-minded people. The Democratic establishment and their political operatives, they're not fearful of him. They're amused. Why are they amused? Because he's given up his bargaining power and says he's going to support the Democratic nominee. He's not going to go independent. He's not going to support a third party. So they're amused because he's going to get more votes out for Hillary Clinton. He has entered the two-party prison. But if you're going to be in the prison, for heaven's sake, attack the Electoral College, where you can come in second and become president, which in effect accentuates the red state, blue state polarization. You know, the Democrats never campaign in Texas or Alaska or Alabama. The Republicans never campaign in Massachusetts, New York, or California. And all this is the Electoral College and gerrymandering as well. Let's say he's lost the primaries, but they still want his endorsement because he has a following. He could say, I'm not endorsing you unless you agree to the following agenda, including a tax on Wall Street speculation. If he doesn't do that, if he doesn't say, I'm not endorsing you unless you seriously support this agenda,
he's giving credibility to the Democratic establishment and to Hillary Clinton.
What Hillary Clinton now is doing to camouflage her corporatist and military crimes and misdeeds, she basically is learning how to mimic Bernie Sanders with his language. This is a tragic period in American history. He's setting up millions of Americans and young Americans for a huge morale collapse when he appears on the stage with Hillary Clinton and he endorses her. And then he is folded into the whole Clinton war Wall Street machine and he continues his merry way. Where does this ever end? Every 4 years it simply gets worse. The parties get more and more corporate indentured.
All right. Thank you, Ralph Nader.